Across our work with hundreds of sales and CS leaders, organizations bring us in all the time to try to understand why they're not closing more. There are always a lot of hypotheses before we start our analysis. We hear things like, deals stall in the proposal stage, so our reps probably need training and negotiation. Or, we're losing a lot of opportunities after demo, so we might want to retrain on how we pitch. But often what we find is discovery, or rather the lack of proper discovery, is generally the biggest reason deals stall or get lost. In the two examples I mentioned, a deal getting stalled in the proposal stage is often an indicator that we don't understand the decision-making process or criteria, details we should really be understanding while we're doing discovery. In the demo stage, this can be a major indication that someone isn't really the right fit for us, or the right fit for us right now. Maybe we didn't determine a trigger, for example, and we have a tire kicker who is just trying to see what's out there. When discovery is done correctly, it not only prevents stalled and lost deals, it saves you time so you can focus on the right opportunities. In our work with clients across multiple industries, you would be surprised just how much revenue grows when reps are trained to do proper discovery and only focus on opportunities that are truly a fit. For example, statistically, you should be close-losting deals twice as quickly as won deals. Something we don't see that often when we're going into organizations and analyzing the patterns of deal progression. When you do the right discovery, though, you're better able to achieve this, save time, and focus on opportunities that will truly help you attain your quota. So what does good discovery look like? Well, let's anchor this back to one of our favorite buyer enablement frameworks, parts. Good discovery is like an onion. There are many layers to it. The outermost layer is often thin and easy to peel off. This is usually what you can glean even before a discovery call. Something like fit. What is the industry, the size, the use case, or the needs of the prospect or client? The answer to this might sound something like, we're a $1 billion MarTech company with a large sales team and need to find a way to understand what's happening on the field. Pretty straightforward, right? Next, we get a layer deeper, which is where part comes into play. If you took our modern-day approach to account research course, you'll remember that part helped us use research to develop our hypothesis and our problem statement. It helped us understand, what are the problems that the prospect needs to solve? The discovery call is an opportunity to validate whether our hypothesis is in fact right or wrong, and learn additional information about the prospects. They might say something like, our manager to rep ratio is 1 to 20. Between one-on-ones, client meetings, and internal meetings, our leaders don't have any extra time to keep a pulse on true deal problems. That sounds like a very big headache and a critical problem for an organization, right? Then we want to understand action. How are they doing it today? We can position our action against it later in the process. For example, they may say something like, we don't record calls, so rely on one-on-ones and Salesforce for all of our deal information. We can see clear issues with that already when we think about things like rep bias and not having all of the information that's truly going on in an opportunity. From there, we want to understand the results. What are the implications of their action today? They might say something like, we've lost so many forecasted deals in the last mile due to issues we should have been able to address early on, resulting in us missing target by 50%. Additionally, we're having major turnover issues because the good managers we have are burned out and have higher return options out there. Finally, we must understand the trigger. Why is the problem important to solve right now? When you're doing discovery properly, you might hear an answer like this. If we don't hit targets in 2 quarters, my team is in danger of facing layoffs, and I cannot afford to have that with the minimal resources we already have. When I say there are layers to discovery involving part, I don't say this as if it's an exact science. We all know that prospect and client calls don't function the same way every time. So don't expect that this will be the exact cadence you go through in every single call. For example, you might get a frantic call from an inbound lead saying, "Help, I just moved to a company that doesn't record any of its calls. All I have is Salesforce and one-on-ones to get context." This is sort of a problem in and of itself, but starting with the action allows us to build further on the problem and results. For example, in this scenario, we might say, "That sounds frustrating. How did you typically do this at your previous company?" Or, "That can't be great for your fellow leaders who have been there for a while either. How have they been feeling from a capacity standpoint?" Or maybe you say, "Is that impacting revenue at all? If they had access to call recording, what would that mean for your organization?" The PART framework is mainly meant to guide you through the general cadence we see. Through this, you can see the answers we are trying to get to, but what are the actual questions we should be asking? If you are thinking that jumping on a call and saying, "Hey, Mr. Prospect, what's your problem?" or "Do you have any triggers?" is the right approach, please listen on. There are some standard rules when it comes to ineffective versus effective discovery. First, avoid asking questions that are readily available online. Instead, demonstrate your understanding so that you gain credibility. Also, don't forget to set the proper context when asking questions. Start with problem questions that set the context for the conversation so focus is in the right area. Another big mistake we see: overly tactical discovery with no business level questions. Effective discovery includes both business level and departmental level questions. Often we see this morph into questions that are surface level and only gather KPI related pains and inconveniences. You should be using more diagnostic questions, which dig into emotional pain that each stakeholder is experiencing in their roles, in addition to those rational pains. I say each stakeholder because that is an important concept here. Oftentimes, ineffective discovery happens because it just occurs with that one initial stakeholder. How familiar does this sound to you? Yeah, we see it all the time. In reality, discovery should be an ongoing process that happens with each stakeholder as they get added to the process, and it should also be used as diagnostic questions throughout. Finally, we see that not enough discovery is completed that helps the seller tie the stakeholder pain and business pain together, making it more difficult to get buy-in and build an actual business case. Discovery is continuous and allows the seller to align their solution to both quantifiable business goals and individual stakeholder pains. This allows for effective business case creation and presentation. Be sure to ask many layered questions to get to this point. Let's get into more specific tips we have for doing discovery. First, it's okay to ask a few close-ended questions for context and guide the conversation to focus on what's relevant, but use them wisely. For example, you might ask, "Have you had challenges recently with longer sales cycles?" Next, avoid surface-level questions. Focus most of your time on open-ended why and how questions. What I mean by this is questions that are like, "How do you understand what's happening in the field today?" Or, "What details have you missed because of how you do it today?" You should also anchor your questions to prior research or a statement from the prospect. For example, "I saw your company has grown its revenue significantly this year through new client acquisition. How has that impacted your team's workload and effectiveness?" We always want to dig into problems and results, both emotional and rational. For example, how does the lack of visibility into real-time deal dynamics affect the business? How does it affect your small but mighty team? How is your team coping with their workload? Is there a risk of losing team members because they aren't hitting quota and earning their OTE? Now, just a reminder, do not do what I just did and ask all these questions one after another in a row. These are just meant to be examples of questions you might ask, but make sure it doesn't sound like an interrogation or a robot. In terms of other stylistic tips, it's helpful to use mirroring and labeling to draw conversation out more. Something like, you mentioned having a hard time spotting issues in deals before it's too late. That sounds frustrating. Saying, that sounds frustrating, is a way of labeling what they've just described to you. Now that you've labeled it, you can dig into that point a little bit further by asking something like, what are some of the issues you wish you would have spotted before, and what was the outcome? Finally, it's important to ask layered questions, and yes, I know I've said this a couple of times already. When a prospect or client mentions something that is significant, dig deeper. I cannot tell you how many video recordings I have watched where a rep just completely misses these cues and doesn't dig into a prospect starting to reveal some of their deepest, darkest secrets. For example, saying something like, you mentioned that lack of visibility into real time data means your team is not prioritizing the right deals and churn risks. How is that impacting your team's quota attainment? Next, let's play a little game to help us understand the do's and don'ts of good discovery. I'm going to read two different questions or set of questions, and as I read them, think about which one you think is the correct way to approach discovery. All right, here we go. First, why were you interested in speaking today about sales and churn issues? Or is it, tell me about what your company does? If you guess the first one, you're correct. We always want to start with asking questions to set the context of the conversation, but going too broad with these types of questions can come off as us not doing our homework or our research. Or it can actually have the prospect go off on a tangent that's not even relevant to us and how we can help. All right, next one. How about, what are your biggest challenges when it comes to managing sales forecasting? Or what are your business challenges? Again, the correct answer is the first one. While both these questions help uncover rational pain, which will help us identify business goals, metrics, and KPIs, the latter is again very broad and doesn't convey that you really understand the prospect or their vernacular. The same applies to questions designed to uncover emotional pain for stakeholders. From what you've just seen, it's easy to understand how questions like, what are your points of frustration with your forecasting process? Or what impact does this have on your ability to hit revenue targets? Would be more suitable questions than a more general, what are your top challenges? Or the slightly cringy, what keeps you up at night? What about when it comes to confirming stakeholders? Would you rather hear, are you the decision maker, or who else would be helpful to include in these conversations? Clearly, it's the second. The first question can make a champion or point of contact feel inadequate, whereas the second is clearly just trying to understand the process of the evaluation and the key stakeholders. In a similar vein, asking what steps have you taken to address this challenge and what comes next is a better way to suss out where someone is in their buying process than a blatant, what's your buying process? By combining the PART framework with these do's and don'ts, you'll better be guided to do discovery that not only helps your opportunity proceed strongly, but also ensure that your process is buyer-centric and focused on a real problem that you can solve.